I don't know if you've seen this, but in Japan, they do have these card games in the arcades where you buy the cards, you put them face down, and that the 3D image appears on the screen.
Really?
And you bat. Oh my God, Maria, this is the coolest
I'm going
thing
to
you've
Japan
seen
in the
your
summer,
life.
so I need to go see this. Hi friends, welcome to the Naavik Gaming Roundtable podcast. This is a one podcast to stay up to date with all the latest game business news. And I'm joined by Aaron Bush, you're used to seeing him here, co-founder of Naavik, and Anil Das-Gupta, co-founder and co-CEO of First Light Games. You're also used to seeing him here. But we have a new face, Aaron Morley. Can you give us a little intro?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I guess you could say Aaron Morley, technically unemployed, but I am just about to start a new job on Monday, which is good news. I'm a product manager. Been working in mobile games this is my 10th year. I've been most recently running my own game studio, which didn't plan out, but I'll soon be joining Sumo Digital to work on a very exciting new project.
Oh, that's amazing. I love Sumo. They're such great people.
Fellow Aarons are great too, so great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, how are we going to distinguish Aaron and Aaron, who are both wearing caps and headsets? I'm not quite sure.
It's tricky. Yeah, usually one of the Aarons is pronounced differently. A lot of people will say Aaron, and I'll be like, no, it's Aaron. So we've got that tricky.
Okay.
It's also hard to do a nickname of Aaron.
R. Oh, that was a terrible joke. Let's move on. In today's roundtable, we're going to continue the whistle-stop tour of the earnings season by analyzing the numbers of Konami, Sony, Take-Two, and Kadokawa. But before all of that, Aaron, you have a small update on what's going on with Meta.
Yeah, so I sort of have a 3-in-1 update here, but I'll start with Meta. First of all, Zuckerberg recently stated that 2023 is a year of efficiency for Meta. And if you recall, in November of last year, the company laid off roughly 13% of its workforce as part of early cost-cutting measures. And in this latest earnings call, the company also made it clear that they're going to be more measured in their spending, which in the case of VR means being more focused. And this makes sense. This is what we called for throughout all of last year. And it's also interesting because metaverse as a term is also being said fewer and fewer times in the earnings call. Not entirely sure what to make of that, but there's something going on with a little bit less emphasis on pushing the whole metaverse narrative while also trying to cut back on costs. And so interestingly, as the company lowers its spending, spending is also increasingly competing with AI-related spending too, which one could argue actually has more immediate benefits for the company than, dumping several billions of dollars into VR efforts this early into that technology's market cycle. And that AI spending, can go into, improving the content recommendation feed as it evolves its follow recommendation graph to be more like TikTok, and its ability to serve effective ads in the wake of ATT. So what this means for Reality Labs and naturally, the gaming ecosystem around VR, in short, means that they have to find, ways to do more with less. And so we'll see how that goes. But the second part of this update with Meta is that US courts ruled against the FTC's earlier ban of Meta acquiring Within, which is a leading fitness VR app, or it's a leading fitness VR company. The app is Supernatural. And anyways, it's just interesting to see this. It's definitely the right call because the VR market is still so nascent, and having startup exits like this exist motivates more entrepreneurs to build new stuff. But bigger picture, it also potentially opens the door for Meta up to do more VR related M&A, including, gaming related M&A again, which, they probably wouldn't have been able to do as much because if, regulators are going to stop tiny acquisitions, then they would have stopped the gaming ones too. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say, since I always have some weird axe to grind with regulators, is that they made the right decision, but their reasoning was really stupid. And so, just to get it off my chest, they said it was based on Meta not having the capabilities to build fitness content. And I'm just like, what the heck are you like what are you saying? That's like absurd, makes absolutely no sense. Of course they could make fitness content if they wanted to. But anyways, bad reasoning, right decision. Lots of changes going on with Meta VR efforts. It's going to probably slow their role a bit with gaming and what people are going to be building on these platforms. But it's definitely not game over by any means. Still a huge initiative. But that's the latest with Meta. And I have a couple other just maybe like short updates that I'll just kind of throw in ad hoc. But we can move on to the next one first.
I mean, I don't want to stop your roll.
All right. Well, I'll just jump into it. So, I mean, one, I thought there were just a couple other things going on this week that deserve a shout out. One is Nintendo actually reported last night, and I haven't looked into it in depth, haven't had time, but from the surface, it appears that the company missed estimates on console sales, among other metrics again. And its guidance for console sales in particular is also not as strong as many expected. And part of this might be macro driven, but of course, the Switch is also 6 years old at this point and, feels a bit more outdated than other consoles on the market. And so it's not that surprising. And I think what really matters from here is it just increases the narrative of like, all right, what's next? When is like the Switch 2 or just that follow-up Switch really going to hit? What's the timing for that? And I would guess 2024, maybe like fall 2024 would be my guess. That could be wrong. Maybe it's 2025. But anyways, I think that's going to be like the next big part of the Nintendo narrative now. And so anyways, wanted to throw that out there because that's also somewhat relevant to talking about Sony's numbers later and kind of comparing that to Nintendo and Xbox. And then the very last update I was going to give was just to kind of give a shout out to Hogwarts Legacy, which is just like the big like blockbuster insane launch of late. And I think it's Warner Brother Games their biggest hit ever. So that's interesting. I'm curious to see the numbers. But we do know that pre-orders were enormous. It broke records on Twitch, and it got good reviews, opposed to a game like Cyberpunk, which came in with these enormous expectations and then didn't deliver. Didn't hit the quality bar gamers were expecting. Whereas Hogwarts Legacy appears to have done that, and it did that despite the kind of noisy boycott around all the J.K. Rowling stuff. But above all, I think it just reiterates how underserved Harry Potter fans have been and how untapped this IP is above like most all other IPs in the world. So seeing this, probably become, I don't know, $1 billion game or something crazy. It just deserves a little attention and a shout out. So thought I'd bring that up as the next big hit.
I think Hogwarts Legacy is going to be my Final Fantasy X, where instead of playing the game, I was playing the sports. They had the underwater, what was it, Blitzball? Yeah, I'm just going to be playing Quidditch all day.
I don't think they have Quidditch, though. That's like a weird thing. Yeah, maybe it'll be a DLC later. But yeah, it's crazy. Don't I'm not,
I almost flipped the table.
Me,
okay.
Yeah, don't flip the table. They might add it in because people like you. But wow. I don't think it's their day one.
I think this is the biggest disappointment I've had this year. Okay. Have to refocus. On the Nintendo earnings, I actually found it really interesting that they announced they're doing a 10% bump on salaries, which seems to be the opposite of what's happening currently in the games industry. A lot of layoffs, and Nintendo goes, hey, we didn't meet expectations, but we're still going to raise everyone's salary.
Yeah, I mean, inflation is also a thing, all around the world. And so even though the games industry has maybe taken a step back demand-wise, it hasn't changed the fact that inflation under the hood affects, cost of livings and things like that. So I think it's good that they're taking care of their employees.
It's a common trend, right? That most companies tend to miss their forecast. But I think the recognition of that isn't because they delivered bad products or they did a bad job. Perhaps some did, but for the most part, people have delivered very good stuff. And I think that's actually very admirable that they will support their staff during such a time. It reminds me, actually, do you remember when Satoru Iwata, there was a time where they all took like a 50% pay cut at the top of the company because the Wii U at the time completely failed. So Nintendo's kind of, been shown to be quite responsible in this respect, I think quite nice in what is not the best climate right now for gaming.
Definitely. And I think it suits them as well to try and retain staff. It's looking at the Japanese scene at the moment, you've got huge run of wave success from software. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It's got to be a hot time for talent in Japan. There's a lot of growth in worldwide sales. And I think somewhere like Nintendo traditionally might be able to lock up talented people for their entire career. I don't know if that's quite true anymore. NetEase are moving in, starting up new studios in Japan. Montreal was announced today, all over the world. So the hunt for talent, Nintendo's probably got some amazing developers and designers and all sorts over there. And if they were to not match inflation, especially with the weak Japanese yen, if it's probably already challenging working conditions and big grind to get these big games out, it would be easy to hemorrhage some talented staff. So I think there's probably a little bit of hard-nosed business reasoning to do that, despite the missed targets as well.
We have lots of earnings to get through today, and I'm actually going to do a 3-in-1 update, which is not really an update. It's going to be a deep dive of Konami's earnings. I thought it was going to be an update, and then I dove into it, and it's actually quite a lot of interesting things that they're doing. So first, to kick it off with a bit of context of their financial results. So 2022, the financial year, was actually their best year ever in terms of performance. And Naavik Digest actually did a little dive into it when Konami made last year's Silent Hill announcements. But unfortunately, they corrected their expectations in their latest earnings, which is going to be just significantly worse. It's currently estimated 44% less than what was originally forecasted in terms of profits. And they're also estimating a revenue growth of 1.2% instead of the original 6.8%. If we dive into their digital entertainment business, which is actually their games business, is forecasted to still achieve a very small year-on-year revenue growth. However, they have a profit decline of 32.6%. And they didn't provide a lot of details, but they contextualize it as an increase in costs of development and promoting titles, but also an increase in R&D costs for the new devs that they're undergoing at the moment. So actually, I looked into it a little bit further, and there's no direct mention of eFootball, and that was previously Pro Evolution Soccer, PES. I only know it as PES because that's how I grew up. I grew up calling it, and that's really underperforming. And I don't think it should be left unsaid because they released the initial version of eFootball. It had a lot of bugs. It didn't feel realistic. There were severe issues with it. They released a 1.0 version, which was meant to address a lot of those issues and finally become the what they called the FIFA killer game. But unfortunately, is still continuing to underperform. And considering how important PES was to the performance of Konami's games portfolio, I think this is taking more of a hit in terms of their revenue growth than is being communicated. And then I also looked at their overall strategy behind these numbers, because if their profit is declining, they're making these investments in R&D. I just wanted to understand, what are they investing in and what are they trying to build up for the future? So as we discussed with Silent Hill towards October last year, they're trying to create an expansive transmedia and AAA cross-platform products. We can see that with their Silent Hill portfolio, but also they're trying to build up their esports community with a surprisingly well-performing mobile game that I didn't know before, which is Professional Baseball Spirits A, but also building up the next generation of Yu-Gi-Oh!, not only in terms of players, but also the competitive scene. And so I think Konami was quite critiqued in the past few years about being mostly dormant as a gaming company, focusing in their other businesses and focusing on PES and eFootball and Yu-Gi-Oh! And their professional baseball mobile game. And so I actually think that they're investing in trying to build the revival of their gaming business and set it up to really grow in the next few years. I'm a little bit concerned about the spread of their focus. As we addressed in the past, they have multiple businesses with pachinko, their Pilates, and a lot more. But also within their gaming IPs, they're trying to build an NFT marketplace. They're selling NFT art with their IPs. They're trying to build this esports scene. They're also trying to create these multimedia IPs and transmedia products. So there's quite a lot going on. I hope that they do come through with excellent games, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes in the next couple of years. Well, what do you all think about this take on Konami building its future strategy?
It is interesting that they appear to be doing that, given that they seem to have given up on games altogether just a few years ago. And I wonder what's triggered that to bring it in. Something I was going to mention, and it's sort of tied to the previous point that Aaron made about Nintendo, is that I believe that in Japan right now, the games dev scene is starting to get a good kick. And I think the reason for that is that a lot of funding came in specifically from the Saudi region, like, Gulf Coast and things like that, where they've put a lot of investment into Japanese companies. And specifically, I believe From Software, I know Capcom definitely took it, perhaps even Bandai Namco, but a lot of them received funding for sort of minority stakes. And what this has meant, and you might have noticed this across the board, is that Japan's on a bit of a tear right now. Like, the quality of games that's coming out of Japan, especially on console, has really gone up. And I suspect it's just as simple as they've had more money to spend on them and they've taken more time. I've definitely noticed that rather than these developers rushing releases, they've taken their time on getting a game out, even delaying it in case, and the quality's been really high. And I think what that started to do, which is really good in a way, I think, is it means that the quality's gone up. The revenues are there to be seen on the other end. Nintendo obviously is known for making big profits, but I don't think we should shy over the fact that Monster Hunter World Frontier for Capcom's done over 20 million copies. I mean, that's an incredible number, right? That blows out of proportion to anything that they've done before. So people can see that they got really strong devs there that are maybe undervalued and it's going in there. So that would definitely make sense why Konami might think, hey guys, when we stopped this kind of video games thing, maybe we should not have done that. It's all just suspicion, but I feel that's why it's done. And I think that's possibly why we're seeing the costs go up there, especially in that particular sector, because especially with the sort of working from home revolution, what's to stop someone going and snatching this talent and bringing it into a Western studio? Language barrier, sure. But they're just some thoughts from my end anyway.
Yeah, because one of the hardest things nowadays for a new studio to build is a good IP that becomes part of culture. And Konami's just sleeping on some of these. The ones that we mentioned, Silent Hill, Castlevania, they're exploring Yu-Gi-Oh!, but there's just potential there to revive IPs that still belong in players'
In the
hearts.
last 2 years on Netflix, you've had Stranger Things, and now on HBO, you've got The Last of Us. What do both those things have in common? And Stranger Things is the most watched thing on Netflix, and The Last of Us is just everyone wants to make that into what's the next video game that's going to be a TV show. And Silent Hill is both scary and it's a video game, and it was amazing. So might be something to work with there, right?
Yeah, and the last take I have in terms of Konami is I wanted to look at their mobile portfolio, because they had Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links that was released since 2016. One of the best, I think the best card collection game on mobile. And then they released Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So they're essentially accepting the cannibalization of their best performing mobile game. Sorry, not the best performing, the second best performing mobile game. And I was trying to understand, and you can see in the data how the cannibalization has happened. But then looking into it, actually Master Duel is part of this plan to build the future of the company, because it was already an old code base with Duel Links. They'd have to change the design. And they wanted to bring that game cross-platform. And so they released Master Duel on the consoles alongside with mobile. And I believe it's on Steam as well. And it's with an attempt to bring more players into the game. So with that ability to rejuvenate the audience of Yu-Gi-Oh! And then age into becoming spenders throughout their lifetime. But also I think they're trying to stay ahead of the curve of player expectations that now their product experiences are cross-platform. And even more so is what I find so interesting about Konami is that I feel like they're taking it a step further. More than being digitally cross-platform, they're trying to bring together the tabletop real-life card game with the digital experience. And yeah, I hope the best for Master Jewel. I love Yu-Gi-Oh! So
that has been done before. I don't know if you've seen this, but in Japan, they do have these card games in the arcades where you buy the cards, you put them face down, and that the 3D image appears on the screen.
Really?
And you bat. Oh my God, Maria, this is the coolest
I'm going
thing
to
you've
Japan
seen
in the
your
summer,
life.
so I need to go see this.
Well, I remember when I went, that what would happen is that the people who would play the game, they're sort of so keen for new players, is they'll give you all their old cards and they'll like teach you the game to try and get you involved in it. It's really, really awesome. So that's sort of the only thing I'll say with Japan is it's one of those markets where you can be successful just in Japan and you can be ridiculously successful. You don't really have to care about the West. So there could also be that angle for it. I'd be curious to Silent Hill and eFootball, they're clearly, going for global sort of success. But, you mentioned the mobile baseball game. That game is, one of those stealth killers in terms of the revenues it does.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's the most popular sport in Japan and you don't really need to succeed outside of it if you're doing those numbers.
Well, it's just distributed in Japan because I looked at the revenue and it performs so well. I can't believe I didn't know it before. It's something I have to dig deeper into. Okay, well, we'll carry on this whistle stop tour, and we have Aaron Bush with Sony. Choo choo.
All right. So let's talk about Sony and PlayStation. And to start, I think we actually just have to provide a quick refresher on Xbox and Microsoft. And so if you remember our last conversation from last week, we noted that Microsoft's quarterly gaming revenue fell 13%, and both hardware and their content services were also down about that much. And we said that its results say more about, Xbox itself more than the console market as a whole, which, elsewhere is seeing, big hits drive both software and hardware sales. And actually, when we talked about Nintendo too, Nintendo's, probably more in line this quarter with like Xbox, but, for different reasons, being a different part of its console cycle. But, 2 out of the big 3 console companies are down, while on the other hand, Sony is in a completely different position right now and is night and day from Xbox. Sony's game and network services revenue, which encompasses all things gaming, grew 53% year over year. And part of that is a bit overstated because of currency fluctuations, but really for the most part, it is grounded in great performance. PS5 units sold rose from 3.9 million in the year ago quarter and also 3 point something million last quarter to 7.1 million units this quarter. And as a result, Sony raised their PS5 expectations. And I think they're targeting like 19 million for the full year. This is Q3 in their fiscal year, which means next quarter is also, they're betting on pretty big unit sales too for PS5. And, besides the hardware, the network services revenue grew 19%, which is, all their software stuff, which of course is, impacted by God of War Ragnarok's epic, launch. And as of a week ago or so, that game had sold 11 million units, essentially making it a $700 million game, still pretty early in its life cycle. And PlayStation MAUs hit a new high of 112 million. And naturally, when you perform this well, other efforts like PSVR 2, which is underperforming, it doesn't matter as much because that's such a small piece of PlayStation's overall puzzle right now. So these results are really good. I genuinely don't know what else there is to unpack here, because for the past several months and even the past couple of years, we've been talking about how PlayStation's success with its top IPs is a huge driver of demand, and that demand would inevitably pick up as supply chain constraints ease up, and that's exactly what has happened. So I guess, really like the question from here is, can Sony continue its momentum throughout the year, even in the face of others like Xbox and Nintendo cutting expectations? Personally, I expect they'll continue to do well because there's still, from what I can tell, plenty of pent-up demand for PS5s, and even, new games like Spider-Man 2, which is, reportedly coming out later this fall, though we'll see. That game could be just as big, if not bigger, than God of War Ragnarok. And so I guess my question to you all is, am I right to have that level of optimism, or should I reel it in a little bit? What do you think?
I'm all with you on the optimism train. I think whatever like dogma or principles guides PlayStation at the moment, it is working very, very well. You can see we're just talking about Konami's use of IP, which is so different, or even looking at parallels between what Microsoft tried to do with their latest Halo game, building a TV franchise. If you compare that in parallel to The Last of Us, the remakes of The Last of Us, the rumored multiplayer experience, and now the HBO series, I think there's a kind of practiced model of building these big IP games. They've got um, active user bases like you have a live mobile game, but they have it at the IP level and they know how to execute on it. And they're not, I think, afraid of heavy costs and delays if it means getting it right. It's in a lot of ways, it makes me think of the Nintendo of the years past where they spoke very openly about it. There's no such thing as a game that's rushed out. It can be bad, right? And then if a game is delayed, you still preserve that aura of what it's like. And I really see that now with on the Sony side, is that where they've seen this thing perform so well, is that they're working internally to make sure what comes out is of a very high quality, and they're really pushing in all the areas of media, which seems to be the big growth channel at the moment, as traditional advertising is becoming harder and harder to pull off these transmedia experiences. They're applying that same principle to the AAA game development, to the shows, and I'm sure we'll see in other areas as well. So yeah, no, I'm feeling very optimistic. There might not be a game in the calendar that I'm like amazed about, unless they say Bloodborne 2 is here. Have a look at that. That would blow me away.
Final Fantasy 16. Oh,
It's not.
okay.
It's not. I mean, it looks cool. It looks cool.
We can't be friends, Aaron.
Sorry. Maybe we can play Blitzball one day. I did like that a lot. But yeah, no, I think they're on a rip. They're doing really, really well. I'm not expecting anything other than a great year from them. And if anything, it's possible to capitalize on where Nintendo have been sluggish to release new hardware, new first-party titles, and expand into other media. And Xbox are struggling with the regulators, and they're jewel in the crown IP suffering as well. So I think it will be a year for Sony to perform really well.
How about macroeconomics? Because in general, I agree with you both. I think they're consistently providing high quality products and it's working well. And I think it's noticeable how pretty much every other company is reporting missed guidances, and Sony is like, oh no, hold my beer. We're just completely destroying you. They're doing great in what is a down economy. But I remember we had this conversation at the end of last year when we were talking about it, and you were equally bullish actually on this, I have to say, Aaron. So, you've been proved right. But do you think it can sustain? That's my only hesitancy. It's nothing to do with them, but will it be a situation of my comment at the time was that console games are expensive these days, $70. The console itself is expensive. When people are struggling to pay their energy bills, etc., can they keep up? And I think you might have said at the time, the demographic that sort of plays PlayStation these days maybe is immune to that, right? They're of that kind of high spending packet, and maybe it's a winner takes all market and Sony is the winner. That would be my only comment. But I do actually agree with you. I think that whether or not they will maintain the same strength, I think in proportion to everyone else, they will be amongst the top performers. I just don't know what that means overall. But I think kind of when we talked about Nintendo, how they increase, wages despite the missing guidances, they kind of recognize that they're doing good. It's just that the world's not doing good.
Yeah, I think my comment was just that there's so much pent up demand for PS5s still that even if some people have to cut back, there still is an enormous line of other people waiting to buy in. And also, I mean, just to jump the gun a little bit to the Take-Two discussion, but one thing Strauss Zelnick, Take-Two's CEO, made pretty clear in the earnings call that I think applies across the games industry was that in a time when gamers are cutting back, they're prioritizing the biggest and best IPs and just the top performing games most of all. And so if PlayStation can continue to deliver this level of hits like we've seen with God of War and Spider-Man and even Final Fantasy, which isn't it's not a Sony game, but it's exclusive on PlayStation. that they probably are in a good position. They're not going to be completely immune. There still is like they have tiers of subscriptions that naturally people are suffering that might not go as high up on their tiers, or sure they might not buy as many games as they would otherwise. So I think that's real, but yeah, I think there's probably still enough pent up demand and they're doing the right things better than the competition that this is where more demand is flowing compared to the rest of the pack. One other way I sort of wanted to spin this conversation, just because I feel like we've kind of beaten this horse to death over time, just because not that much changes every quarter, with these companies. It still is like the same fundamental underlying story, but I sort of wanted to tie it into what is going on with Microsoft and Activision. Obviously, there still is a large chance that that deal might not go through, but I just want to play the hypothetical that if it goes through and Activision, all of those brands get roped into Xbox, it becomes part of Game Pass, and all of a sudden, subscription as a business model, like Game Pass as a contender, it like doubles its impact pretty rapidly. How do you think Sony should respond? Do you think they should continue to do their own thing? Do you think that should accelerate their timeline to a subscription? If so, how the heck do they think through the economics of that? Just if you were in Sony's shoes and something like that were to happen, what is the rational step to take?
We see that Sony, we discussed in the last week's episode with David that Microsoft is still trying to catch up with this mature pipeline of the first party titles, really strong IPs. And I think this is what we're seeing Sony now reap the rewards of having that training, like you're saying, Aaron. And we see Sony now trying to move into mobile because they also want to build up that pipeline with such an addressable platform. And we see Microsoft trying to do that with the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. We look at King and they're still performing so well just looking at Candy Crush. And so if they do manage to get through that acquisition, that gives Microsoft a leg up in building that pipeline and that experience within the company in the mobile segment. So do you think that Sony's approach in terms of trying to mature the mobile market is a must-have step to continue being the leader?
I don't think so. I think what they're doing in console doesn't have too much have to do too much with what they're doing in mobile. Whether they succeed in mobile or not, I don't think that's going to have an outsized impact on their console business. If anything, it just further extends like the power of their IP in other directions. But I don't know, maybe Aaron or Nil, do you agree with me on that, or is there more to that should be unpacked?
It still feels very experimental to me, in a similar thread to what they're doing with PlayStation VR2, although they have more proven results with obviously the first headset and some success there, even though VR itself is not an enormously profitable sector. I see the mobile side. They've acquired some great talent. They've got Savage Game Studios, as first party banner title now. We know they're making a shooter game in Unreal Engine 4, so that's an interesting place to be. It's a very tough segment, but it's still growing, and a lot of eyeballs in places like Brazil, Indonesia, even Japan, which should complement and extend Sony's reach of IP if they weave that in as well. I think there's still a lot of room for success, but it feels to me much like trying to have your cake and eat it all. They're sitting on some great results. This is a calculated bet. If we can expand into mobile, we can achieve even bigger results for future big IP when it launches on console, has a mobile element, etc. I'm sure there will be approaches to building brand new stuff through the Sony brand, but for me, it still feels a little bit like that just now. It's a little bit under wraps. It's a little bit unknown exactly how they're going to execute. And if we look at what they've done with other platforms, I expect them to take a long time and then try and push out very, very large games. A bit like how Call of Duty Mobile had a pretty quick soft launch and then exploded onto the market. I expect an attempt to do something similar for PlayStation's mobile arm, to pick one of their strongest IPs and try and create a massive opening in like a defensive moat type market, whether it's shooters with Savage Games or something totally different. But it takes a lot of time for even experienced staff to find success and growth levers on mobile now. It's very complicated trial and error based process, and you need deep pockets. Sony's got the deep pockets. I think the interesting question will be, do they have the appetite for the 2 steps forward, 1 step back that is launching new games on mobile now? Same question I see myself asking for Netflix. It's going to be a very interesting calendar year, but I'm not expecting anything enormous really until maybe 2024, when some of these games have been through a soft launch, have reinvented themselves, and are maybe coming to devices.
To come back to your question on should they go for the sort of subscriptions if that thing was to happen, I don't think that they should, because I think Sony are kind of, they've made a space now where they are almost the undisputed masters of it. You buy a PlayStation to play a really high quality, amazing sort of movie experience as a game type thing. Be that God of War, be that Last of Us, be that Horizon Zero Dawn. You know what you're going to get. Very cinematic, top end. It's the best. You can only find it on Sony. You can't find it anywhere else. So I don't think they would really be that scared, to be honest with you. It's like, why risk going into something that may or may not work when you're already leading the way with what you've got? The only sort of counterpoint I could say to my own argument is that, where do you go in the future? The one thing I would say is that, like, people who really sort of play PlayStation a lot tend to be, I guess, like ourselves that grew up with it, right? But are people who are growing up now buying PlayStations, not in so much, which is, I think, the real reason why they'd be moving to mobile, using actually what Aaron's just said there in terms of the high quality, trying to repeat the same trick, but maybe on a different platform. And, you know, if that's your core belief that that's how you're going to win, you're going to win with quality, which, to be honest with you, has always been the Sony hallmark, right? It's not just for the PlayStation. Like, I remember as a kid, like, you'd buy a Sony TV because it was perceived to be better, even though it was like £100 more expensive than something else, but you would buy it and you'd be happy with it. And that's sort of like, seems to be the fundamental value throughout everything they do. So look, could be wrong, but I kind of feel that explains why they'll always test the waters, a bit like what they're doing with VR and many other things. But I think, you know, again, you said yourself that their sort of modus operandi or whatever guiding principles they have at the moment is clearly really working. And it feels like a sort of long-term strategy that they've doubled down on. It's funny because sort of like they lost their way with PS3, then PS4 was like the comeback arc, and PS5 is now like almost back to their best. And I feel they'll just stick with it, really.
I think it's a good point to continue to the next stop with Take-Two. And that's you, Anil.
Someone totally stole my thunder on this one, I've got to say, by dropping the most interesting. No, that's okay. Because I was going to say this is not the most interesting, but it's still relevant going through. You know, they pretty much did as they were doing before. So they, like a lot of companies in this sector, they have missed booking slightly. They're sort of 95% on target, but not too bad. But, you know, not as bad as Konami, but, you know, not the success that Sony was. As a result, they've said that they're going to be making some operational cost savings, a small amount between 50 to 100 million, which I think you would expect anyway, given that they just acquired Zynga. And, you know, I'm sure they've got a lot of follow-ons, like, you know, talking about their mobile studios. You've got now, you know, Natural Motion, you've got Nordeus, you've got Social Point. I don't think you need to have the same people in each one of those 3 companies doing the same job. So I'm sure there's some consolidation. I think the things that are really worth talking about, though, is they also do like an earnings call at the same time. And I used to hold stock in Zynga because I used to work there. So, you know, I do tend to follow these quite a bit. And there were some interesting things that I think are worth talking about. So one is they sort of mentioned for the first time, I've really sort of seen them big this up and say, you know, they want to deliver across an array of platforms and captivate global audiences. That sounds pretty, you know, copy paste from everything else, but I think like across an array of platforms is interesting. Like, I feel that they may be going more cross-platform. I mean, they obviously have a huge console hit in the Grand Theft Auto games. We'll talk about that in a moment. They've just bought Zynga, which is mobile. Are they going to be going cross-platform? It would make a lot of sense with the IPs. We've just talked about it with Sony as well. I strongly suspect they must be working on something like this. When and where will it come along? I can say that Zynga, I don't know if they globally launched it, but they were working on a Star Wars game, Star Wars Hunters, I think it was, which was both a Nintendo Switch and the mobile game, which was pretty unusual for Zynga. That's certainly the first time that they've done that. So that's perhaps something that we could kind of see. I think it's interesting that they said that their balance sheet remains strong, allowing them to navigate these uncertain times with confidence. And I wonder if that's a hint that they might be buying more. Zynga especially, you know, they love to buy companies. They've got quite the portfolio underneath them. They did make acquisitions even post this one happening out there. They bought who was it? The app sharing. I have the name for it escapes me. They did bid by like an app store optimization platform along the way in the year, and yeah, the big thing that kind of was stolen. But I really agree. They said, we believe that consumers shifted their holiday spending towards established blockbuster franchises and titles that offer the price promotions in light of macroeconomic conditions. And I think this is very telling. So I think from their behalf, it's sort of telling, so it sort of hints that they're not really going to play too much of the innovation card. They're sort of reading the room, and it's like, okay, people, they like their Grand Theft Autos, they like their Red Dead Redemptions. They're probably not going to like insert new genre or game that could be made here. Doesn't mean that they won't develop them, but they just don't expect it to perform well. I think that kind of backs up, especially what Aaron just said previously with Sony just absolutely hitting home. Like God of War they always do a great job, but those are really, really good numbers for Ragnarok. That's kind of insane numbers. So that really sort of proves that that's what people want, this sort of known established quality. And I think it's probably also proven with their own thing. So they also mentioned that now GTA 5 has sold 175 million copies. I mean, yeah, I don't think you can really put that into your head about how big that is, right? I think that the nearest thing that comes close to it, I think, is like Wii Sports, and that was bundled with the Wii. So that doesn't even count really, because that just counts people buying the platform. So how they've done that, and I just find it hilarious how this game came out. It came out on PS3, did it not? Right? It's not even like a PS4 title. And, most other companies would have GTA 6 already ready to go. We know next to nothing about it other than some internet leaks. And they're still not rushing. They know they're going to take their time. There's no need to rush it, I guess. GTA 5 is still doing gangbusters. Yeah, that's kind of what I would do. I wonder if anyone else had any interesting takeaways from them. Otherwise, it was just kind of like, climate isn't so good, so we're not doing as well as we hoped we would do, but we're still doing okay considering, and, it will pick up in the future. That was my key takeaways from Take Two.
Nice. Yeah, not on the earnings itself, but I did see. Now, of course, this is a leak and a speculation. There's a lot flying around about GTA 6 kind of being ready to drop, right? Like, but it's coming very soon.
Really?
There are a couple of renowned leakers on Reddit and Twitter. So take that with a very heavy pinch of like nice coarse grained salt. But yeah, I think that's an interesting one, because GTA 5, I think, has had such a long life cycle because the team behind it really built GTA Online into the heart of the future for it. And it is now much more like a game platform like Roblox or Minecraft or Fortnite. One of the biggest growth vectors for GTA 5 over the last few years has been role-playing in the GTA 5 world through great modding tools and specific role-playing servers. Even YouTube celebrities making songs with role-playing Twitch streamers, and building up a whole kind of 360 network. I think GTA, it kind of has the space of the cool online platform, right? If Fortnite and Roblox skew younger, then your Gen Zs that might not be buying PlayStations specifically for PlayStation, they want to be in GTA. So I wonder what we'll see for GTA 6. I wonder if anyone has an interesting view on this. Like, how are they going to have this right at the forefront? Because GTA 5, of course, launched 2 console generations ago without GTA Online. GTA Online at the start was far simpler than what it is today. How do you bring all those learnings to home and ultimately not cannibalize or decay on what has been so successful for GTA 5? Let's not forget as well, Red Dead 2 tried to do this with years and years of data and learnings, and really, really they had a terrible time with that. Maybe the game itself is hard to make it happen. I wouldn't comment on that, but how do you make sure GTA 6 can actually be a step above something as successful as GTA 5? Is it even possible?
Well, I guess I would start by saying I'm sort of skeptical of the leaks and saying that it's coming soon. These games are notorious for being delayed. And I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we saw the actual leaks of, some hacker that got into their Slack or something and, shared some footage of the game. And it was, pretty clear from that there was, quite a long ways to go, although I wouldn't overly hinge to that either. But I think there's a lot of ways to level up GTA 6 from GTA 5 just as like an open world game, because there's just been so many learnings about building open world games since then. that I'm not too concerned about that. But yeah, seeing how they decide to also tie that back into GTA Online and continue to level that up, I think will be exciting. If anything, like I'm probably less concerned about cannibalization. Like clearly, the people who play GTA Online are probably going to be really excited about GTA 6. But if anything, it's more of an opportunity for someone like me who hasn't played a GTA game since GTA 5. I'm excited to play that, and I don't know if that'll then convert me into GTA Online, but I'm sure it could convert a lot of new people that haven't thought about GTA in quite some time too. So there could actually be more of an opportunity there than cannibalization. But I think it's good to just bring GTA 6 up in general because, I look at Take-Two's latest results and I'm like, all right, they kind of missed on everything. And the cost cutting makes sense. They're becoming a more efficient business. Like it's the right move. But at the same time, I'm just kind of like, so what? Like, what's going to drive the value of this company so much more over the next couple of years is GTA 6. And again, not to say other games don't matter and all that things. It's just like these games are that huge and that important.
You're being honest. It's not even being unfair to say that. Let's get real. The one thing that's going to drive that business is GTA 6. It's really unlikely that anything else could move the needle enough, really.
Yeah, so it's enormous. And so, my question is just like, well, can GTA 6 live up to GTA 5? Like, was GTA 5 just a fluke in video game history that happened to like perform at that insane level above everything else? Like, is that replicable? Is my like biggest question here. Like, clearly it's going to do awesome, but is it 175 million units, replicable? I don't know.
It can't be, surely. That's what the other Aaron asked as well. Like, can it live up to the hype? I was at Capcom when some people were working on Resident Evil 5, and that game, we really tried hard with it. But ultimately, when you played it, you just couldn't beat Resident Evil 4 that came before it because that was the masterpiece and broke records. And sometimes you've almost got to be like, how do you do it? It's second album syndrome almost, isn't it? Although in this case, it's the sixth album, so not quite. But I just think those units are just so ludicrous that if you only sold 80 million copies of a video game, I personally think I'd be pretty pleased with that. But this would be a game where that would probably be seen as a disappointment, which is ridiculous. I think to answer the question, maybe the way that they level up, and perhaps with what they're kind of hinting at, is they could have it more of a kind of cross-platform play from the beginning. There could always be like a free-to-play companion or something. Online was kind of built into it, but actually GTA 5 Online does have a lot of problems with its online components. Like, it's very hackable. The community is extremely toxic, which I think you'd expect given it's a GTA game. But you are right. I believe like last year as well, they did start talking whilst the metaverse was hot of like, oh, we've already got the world's best metaverse. It's called Grand Theft Auto Online. And even though that might sound facetious, I actually think he had a really good point to say that. I mean, it's a game that you can walk around, you're a character, you can explore it. It is kind of, the feeling of what it should be. So if you put all these elements in together, I think if it was designed the right way, actually, perhaps in terms of units sold, it may not be so successful, but in terms of revenues made, actually, there is potential for it to do better because these things, they may not have factored into the original development. And that might be more where they could optimize it.
Yeah.
If they're building GTA 6 to be the next leader for the decade, I think they will be considering UGC and how they can add that within the online play. If we look at all of the demographic analysis about the younger generations and what they engage with, that's what they want, and they're going to age up over the next 10 years. That's just my take. I don't know how accurate it is.
I think you're probably right. I don't know if that'll come out day one or if they'll build that more up over time. Like, the thing about GTA Online is that it's just like a living, evolving creature, right? That iterates over time. But yeah, I mean, I would expect this game is going to have an insane launch. It's more like the long tail of like the units sold. I think is probably more put into question. Where Anil, you're saying maybe the opportunity is like that's okay if they can find more upside, in their online modes. I think that's interesting, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But if that's true, and like there is some risk there, then it also does make sense, like why they're investing elsewhere, like more in the Zyngas of the world, even if they overpaid for that deal. Like the idea of having like steadier, higher margin revenues come from mobile makes all the sense in the world to kind of counteract any whiplash that happens from these mega franchises. And, back to the other franchise point, like I am curious to see how they will invest in some of their bigger franchises kind of for this next generation. The BioShocks, Borderlands of the world. I guess we'll see. I also like that Take-Two is always taking shots at new franchises. It doesn't always work, but they've done that for the past decade. Basically, like they're less reliant on GTA now than they ever have been in the past, and that's because of their M&A one, but also just like their efforts in building these other franchises out over time. And so to see them continuing that trend is nice. Obviously, it's hard to like really build that next level IP, maybe harder than it was even 10, 15 years ago. But I think their fundamental strategy is sound. They just have to, if they are going to do more M&A, they just have to be a bit smarter about what they pay than they did with Zynga this last time, which again was maybe an exception because of how the changing dynamics in the mobile market just kind of skewed perceptions.
They were late to the party there, right? That kind of made sense. But I do agree, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So you got to give them some kudos to at least keep going for it.
One final thing I was going to say, sorry, Maria, just is very quickly, but regardless of what game it is, I can't think of another games business that right now, today, has the complete kind of full stack of every defined sector of how people play games. Take-Two in purchasing Zynga, of course, they have the console and PC market that they know very well, but within mobile, they have core games, stuff like Star Wars Hunters, CSR, some of the RPGs they've made. They've got hyper casual through Rollic. They've got ASO platforms. They've got cross promotion tools. They've got internal ad mediation. So wherever you are in the world, however you play games, they have access not only to you through an internal studio or tool, but they're sharing all of that data across the entire stack. So something like GTA 6, how they can leverage that and find an in point for people, I think is unbeatable. There's not another business I can think of today. People are building it, like PlayStation and Xbox, trying to build new ways to do this. But if Take-Two wants to get people to play GTA one way or another through one type of platform or experience, they have everything in the arsenal to execute on that. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see how it's all brought to home for GTA 6 or not.
To wrap up today's episode, we'll have a last earnings topic. And Aaron, you have the pleasure of taking this on, first time, first company. And that's Kadokawa, if I pronounced it correctly.
I mean, I hope so. That's what I'll be saying. So if anyone is fluent in Japanese and watching, please correct me where I make terrible mistakes. It's not deliberate. And yeah, totally the opposite end of the spectrum to what we've been talking about. Kadokawa as a business is something I wasn't really aware of prior to doing the research for this. We're going to talk about them because they are the majority stockholder in From Software. Of course, had a mega hit with Elden Ring. But if we look at Kadokawa kind of from the top, they've been around for a good length of time. They were founded in 1945. They've had some mergers over the years. More recently, in 2014, they purchased From Software outright. Since then, in the summer of 2022, in August, Sony purchased 14% of From Software and Tencent purchased 16% of From Software. So with Kadokawa seeing enormous growth for its games business thanks to Elden Ring, a lot of that coming from outside Japan, and a desire to move into a kind of mixed media approach. What do all of you think about how they could do this with From Software's IP? Does it make sense to do a straightforward syndicated TV show or anime using that IP, or can we expect something a little bit more different?
It's interesting. What can they do to spread their growth in the West? I think Elden Ring was the first time that they sort of tried that anyway, right? They had George R.R. Martin, which was quite a departure from their previous games. Although I think it's interesting because though he helped with the world building, it's not what I would call like a true Western game per se, right? From Software games don't really have strong character arcs. You're the character, you're kind of leveling up yourself really, and the amount of times you keep dying over and over again if you've ever played their games. I'd be curious if they are going to try and make a game that really is built from the West, from the ground up. I kind of feel that every time a Japanese studio tries that, it ends in disaster, but surely someone's going to crack it someday. But again, if they're talking about publishers, maybe they could find games that are looking promising already in the West and then sort of take them in and give them some, experience in how to grow it. The sort of transmedia strategy is interesting, but I think that with all of the From Software stuff, again, they don't really have IP, in my opinion, that would make for a compelling movie, TV show, because although they have good universes, there isn't like, it's that guy from maybe Sekiro, they have the samurai character, but that's not as big as an IP as the other one. So I don't think that would be a applicable strategy for them right now. It is something that they could build towards though in maybe 5 to 10 years, but what they need to do that, they'd need to make more IP that maybe had some of those elements in them and try and get them to work in the West. I think what they do have the advantage of though is that they've got that effect of no matter what their next game is, everyone's going to buy it, right? Because they got such a good reputation, which is a great thing to have. And that means you can be more experimental and you could try something like that and you might have a shot at it where you wouldn't normally. A constant theme of this whole day has been the emphasis on building really high quality IP and why it's so advantageous to have it. So if you're in a unique situation, you might have a shot or two where you could get away with launching something new that other people didn't. That would be something that they could try. That would be my thoughts, but I'd be actually quite curious how they go about doing it. These are not easy problems to solve.
Yeah, I think they got a taste of what a larger release is like with Elden Ring, but also replicating that again with their style of game in other ways is probably going to be a near impossible task. Like, sure, they can eventually make Elden Ring 2 or something, and that'll do really well, and they can kind of continue on this formula that they've created. But expecting them to create another Souls-like game that's different from, like this open world kind of game that's also going to be this massive global hit, I would be a bit skeptical of that. So I almost feel like, if that is their goal, just to create more global epic releases, that might not be the right one. And rather them continuing doing what they already do really well and maybe just slightly increasing the pace of that, or creating, even more longevity around some of these franchises like the Elden Rings and bringing more like long-term retention to that in some way. That could be more the way to go. But I do think it's interesting how they're also expanding out of this and back into something like Armored Core, which I don't know much about that franchise other than that the last game was published over 10 years ago. And it, I don't think it ever was an epic seller. But as you were saying, Anil, like the fact that Elden Ring has done so well, and even the Dark Souls games have, built up a large fan base over time. Anything else FromSoft puts out, there's going to be eager people from day one, at least to learn more. And so if they can take that enthusiasm and point it in new directions, whether that is the next Elden Ring sort of doesn't really matter. They can still expand their business in interesting ways, without just being obsessive about finding the next Elden Ring, right? So I think that's probably where they should go, and it seems like maybe where they are going. But yeah, I guess it's just a question to me of like, can they execute as extremely well in these other categories as they do in the Souls-like games? And that I don't know.
I think that's a good way to wrap up today's episode. Anil, the errands? I was trying to figure out a creative way to say Aaron, or the errands. Yeah, thank you so much for joining today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on your preferred platform, leave us a comment on YouTube, sign up to the Naavik free digest newsletter, if I can say it properly. And you can also listen to our other segments with the Crypto Corner and the interviews. We will see you all next week.